this is the True Crime Nightmare podcast, and this is episode 44. This case involves a case of mistaken identity. The victim's name was Christopher Foster, who was a young man out enjoying a drink with his friends when he was suddenly set upon. It ended up with him being viciously stabbed to death. Christopher Foster was only in his early 20s when he was murdered, and he was a father to a 4-year-old little girl. The brutal murder took place in 2013 in London, England. Christopher Foster worked in the City of London for a law firm, and he was doing very well with his life, despite only being 24 years old. The attack happened very suddenly and it escalated very quickly. There were many attackers. It was thought originally anywhere between 2 and 6 attackers, and it was initially believed that they all took part in the murder of the young man. The attackers mostly wore hooded tops with the hoods up, presumably to obscure their identities, it would appear. It was a premeditated attack, but the wrong man became the victim, not their actual intended target after all. Christopher Foster was literally in the wrong place at the wrong time, and these so-called men were hell-bent on attacking a man who they believed had injured a cousin of one of the attackers. How they made such a stupid mistake is unclear, but either way, obviously, they should not be exacting that type of violence and so-called revenge on anyone, regardless of whether it's the right person or not. Once the police were on the scene, they set to work straight away. Luckily, it being London, there was a lot of CCTV images available, which, as it would turn out, proved extremely useful in solving the murder and taking some extremely violent and out-of-control individuals off the streets. The police officer who led the case was Detective Chief Inspector John Sandin. He stated early on that Christopher Foster was just an innocent man out for a drink with friends and minding his own business when he was ambushed and fatally stabbed to death. Once the many images from the CCTV cameras in the area were collected and checked, it became fairly clear who the men were, and positive identifications were established after a very short time. The men probably knew that they would end up being identified, and although some attempts were initially made to run, it was not long until all of the men responsible were tracked down and taken into police custody. That must have been such a relief to everyone in the area and Christopher's family and friends as well. Also, it must have been a relief to the man who was their actual intended victim to know that at least they were off the streets for a while. Christopher Foster was stabbed multiple times in the back by these cowards, and he ended up collapsing in the pub that he had been standing outside of when he was initially set upon. So, as I said previously, it did not take the police very long to identify all of the men involved in the murder. They arrested them and charged all of them fairly quickly. 4 men were charged with the actual murder of Christopher Foster, and these were Aitak Lezani, who was 33 years old at the time, Billy Dove, who was 30 years old, Ali Lezani, who was 38 years old and the brother of Aitak, and Rocky Al-Dajjal, who was 34 years old. So these men were all in their 30s and should have been totally aware of any consequences to their actions. But once you throw drugs and heavy drinking into the mix, it is usually another story with sadly predictable outcomes to people. These men had been in trouble before and were known to the police and were known to many people in the area as being a bad lot, bad trouble. Detective Chief Inspector John Sandin stated that Christopher Foster was just an innocent man out for a drink with friends, and he was minding his own business when he was ambushed and fatally stabbed to death. It was seen that this gang, who had other members in besides the 4 men, main culprits of this brutal crime, were just intent on, if not killing, then definitely seriously injuring someone. They were hell-bent on tracking down the man who had apparently slashed one of the Lezani brothers' cousins across the face and had gone out for the night ready to attack, and if not more than attack, maybe kill the person that they were after. They all had total disregard for anyone and were totally out of control on that night, and probably on many nights before as well. Christopher Foster did not know any of the men involved in the attack on him, and he had done nothing to draw attention to himself. It would seem that he just bore a passing resemblance to the man that the gang were looking for. It was too late for him once they started on him, however. They chased him down a alleyway close to the pub that he had been standing outside of, and he ended up staggering back into the pub after he'd been brutally stabbed multiple times. Despite being rushed to the nearest hospital, it was too late to save him, and he sadly died. He left behind many friends and family members, including his young daughter. Christopher Foster had a good job with good prospects and had everything to live for. The same cannot be said about the evil men who viciously stabbed him to death, however. Luckily, along with many images from the various cameras that had been operating in the area, there were many witnesses to the crime and many made statements to the police. The murder case took place at the Old Bailey in London in November of 2014. With all of the evidence available, it was no surprise that all 4 men were found guilty of Christopher Foster's murder. 2 other men who had been charged in connection with his murder were found not guilty. Lengthy sentences were passed down to all 4 murderers, and hopefully they will be away behind bars for many years to come, if not for the rest of their miserable lives. The fact that Christopher was murdered due to a botched up mistaken identity by a gang who were drug-addled just seems so pointless. He had nothing to do with any of them and had never met them before. Once the attack was underway, they could not be stopped. They were totally out of control and determined to attack, regardless of the outcome. The murder took place in a place called Borough High Street, which is in a road in Southwark, London, which runs southwest from London Bridge. Christopher Foster had been 24 years old and worked at a law firm called Pinsent Masons in London. His 4-year-old daughter was called Christina. The jury had heard that on the evening of Friday the 29th of November of 2013, Christopher Foster was standing with a friend in an alleyway just outside the St Christopher's Inn pub on Borough High Street. The men were just enjoying having a drink outside and were shortly going to be heading to their homes after having spent the evening with friends in various pubs that Friday night. Suddenly, a group of men involving some of the defendants appeared, seemingly from nowhere. All of the men were trying to obscure their identities by wearing hoods as well as scarves. One of the men carried a bat and another man carried a knife. The men attacked Christopher without any warning, and he was stabbed in the back many times whilst he was desperately trying to get away from the men. He managed to get inside the pub and he then collapsed onto the floor. He was rushed to the Royal London Hospital, but he died 90 minutes later from his injuries. He was from Southwark in London and worked in the administration department for a local firm of lawyers. The court heard that the men had gone out looking for another man who was also thought to have been out in the local area at the same time. This very fortunate man had been accused of harming a cousin of 2 of the attackers in a previous attack some 2 weeks ago. Apparently, Billy Dove, one of the accused, had spotted who he thought was the man that the Lizani brothers were after in an alleyway close to another pub near the St Christopher's Inn pub that Christopher Foster and his friend were at. Billy Dove then called the cousin who had supposedly been attacked 2 weeks before, and he contacted his cousins to tell them where the man could be found that night. The group of men that made and received many phone calls from each other and decided to get their so-called revenge. At about 11:30 that night, CCTV footage from the area of Borough High Street clearly showed members of the group or gang meeting up. According to people who viewed the footage later, the group looked pumped up and ready to cause trouble. Aitak Lizani would eventually admit to stabbing Christopher Foster. Many eyewitnesses testified to what had happened, and the CCTV footage captured the man stabbing Christopher, so he knew he could not really deny it. After the murder, Aitak Lazani drove to Brentwood and the other gang members went their separate ways. However, CCTV footage and witness accounts and mobile phone records made this case very easy for the police to solve and eventually bring to trial. Christopher's family and friends showed so much dignity throughout the whole investigation and during the court case as well. It was heartbreaking to think that a young man can just be out having a drink with a friend, probably after working hard all week, and then he is suddenly attacked and fatally stabbed by a gang of hopeless men who do not offer anything to society, in my opinion anyway. Unfortunately, the phone calls between each member and the fact that they felt they needed to teach someone a lesson escalated into a nightmare from which one man lost his life in such a brutal way. They all clearly egged each other on and could not be stopped, it would seem, from what they wanted to do. Even if it was the right man who they had attacked, and even if he had slashed a family member of the group, they still had no right to go about getting their revenge this way. It was absolutely barbaric. The prison sentences passed down from the judge were as follows. Aitak Lazani was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 23 years for murder. Billy Dove was given 6.5 years for conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm. Ali Lazani was sentenced to 7.5 years for conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm. And Rocky Dizali was given 6 years for conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm. 2 other suspects were found not guilty of the charges against them. Mohammed Adamahani and Ricky Huggins, they were both acquitted of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and were allowed to be free of all charges. At least the main culprit was the one that was given the longest sentence and with any luck will never be released from prison. 23 years minimum term just feels too low and hopefully he will not be released. Christopher Foster had so much life to live and so much to look forward to. He was a positive member of society and will obviously be greatly missed by all that knew him. The men put away do not really appear to offer anything positive to society, and despite being in their 30s when they carried out the attack that led to an innocent man's death, they will, in all likelihood, have many years out free to enjoy the rest of their lives. Hopefully they will contribute in a positive way if and when they are released, but the signs are probably not that good. Gang mentality is very dangerous and anyone on the receiving end of it simply does not stand a chance against so many people. The savage way that they sought to exact their so-called revenge just shows you how they value human life. They were all totally out of control and did not care what happened to their victim. Luckily, all of the evidence was readily available to have them all in custody within a very short period of time before they could leave the country or just to go underground somehow. Who knows what Christopher Foster would have gone on to achieve. It is just wrong and extremely sad that he was not given the chance to live his life. And the fact that he had a very small daughter who he played a very active part in her life and supported her financially as well. And she will miss out on all those years with her father. It's so very sad. You also have to feel for the people that were present that night, that were just enjoying a night out at their local pub, and especially Christopher Foster's friend who he was actually having a drink with when suddenly his friend Christopher was set upon, and he obviously was powerless to do anything to stop the attack because, you know, they were armed with a bat and a knife, and also there were more of them, and it must just have been awful just to watch what happened and, you know, frantically try to save his friends. But unfortunately it was too late by the time Christopher made it into the pub and sort of collapsed and the cowards ran off. There was not very much anybody could do by the sounds of it. He managed to stay alive for another hour and a half once he got to hospital, but obviously he'd been injured just too severely and presumably lost a lot of blood as well. So it was very sad, and it must leave such a horrible imprint on people's memories of what happened, all around them, with them probably feeling that they just couldn't do anything to stop this attack from happening. I also don't believe that the people that were convicted of, not only the person that was convicted of actually stabbing Christopher, but also the other people that were involved that were found guilty, I just don't think their sentences really reflected the severity of the crimes. They're all involved. They all egged each other on. They started the ball rolling, really, by making the phone calls and, like I say, egging each other on. And they were prepared to go along with it and to try and get away with what they had done. But yet they still only really get like 6 or 7 years, which could even end up being less than that. I just think it's wrong. I think they should have been given a life sentence as well. They could have done something about it, or at least not got involved. But it just seemed a bit weak, and the sentences just seem so low, really. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to this very sad episode. The credits for this episode go to the websites london-se1.co.uk and standard.co.uk. Thank you very much.